Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Your Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today I have on guest Dr. Carol Lourie. She's a dedicated practitioner with over 3 decades of clinical experience as a naturopath, acupuncturist, and homeopath. The environmental impact of our society has severely impacted women's health and hormones, and more than ever, women are suffering from hormone imbalances such as PMS, PCOS, thyroid disturbances, infertility, peri and menopausal difficulties, and even breast cancer. Restoring hormonal balance involves taking charge of as many aspects of your environment, internal and external, as possible. And the emotional landscape must always be considered for there to be real healing. So, after 30 years and thousands of patients, Carol has witnessed how healing is always possible. So, welcome to the show, Dr. Lourie. Tell
I'm
us,
so happy to be here. Thank you.
tell us about yourself and your journey to becoming a naturopath. How did that start?
Well, I was always interested in healing and what makes people ill, and then how do they recover their health. And originally, I had planned on going to medical school, but as the universe would have it, I was working, living in a spiritual community in New York, and I ended up working for this doctor who, in the 70s, did detoxifying programs using iridology.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that in the 70s, the word detox was not a household name like it is now. So this was very avant-garde, and
As
people,
is iridology. Explain to the listeners
yes,
what that
oh
is, because
yes,
we haven't had anyone talk about that yet.
iridology is very far out. You look in the eye, and it's divided into different sections. And if there's these little black dots, and you can all go to the mirror and look in certain sections, that is an indication that you have disease or you have a potential to have disease in certain organ systems. And as you detoxify, your irises change. And that is like you're sick, you do blood work, and then you get better and the blood work changes. It's the same thing with the eye.
Sure,
It's
sure.
very far out. So he used the eye, the iridology, to help people recover their health. And he put them on these juicing diets and blended salads, and it was vegetarian and banana days and nut butter. And it was very far out. And I was coming from a strictly medical background. And I thought to myself, you have bad skin, you take antibiotics. What is the big deal? I mean, that's how naive I was.
Mm.
And this one young girl came in with horrible cystic acne. And that's when I was thinking, why isn't she just taking antibiotics? And the next month she came back and she was like 80% better. She'd lost weight. She felt great. And then I started really paying attention, and I realized that he was getting all the people that had either been not served by the medical profession or
Hmm.
actually made worse. And he
Yeah.
was helping them get better. So I became very interested in natural healing. And one day I was going through this huge pile of paperwork that was on his assistant's desk. And there was the catalog to the National College of Naturopathic Medicine. And that was the light bulb moment for me. I thought, oh, maybe I should go here. And I did.
Yeah.
So Portland, Oregon, here I come. And then I moved to California and I got my acupuncture license, and I've been here ever since. And that was many years ago
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
And natural medicine and natural healing and functional medicine have really come a long way, as has naturopathic medicine in all of this time.
I bet. Yeah.
And yeah, it's been over 30 years. So we're making progress all the time, but it's still an uphill battle with women as far as, and men, but we're talking about women here, as far as divorcing yourself from the standard American advertising messaging, which we get exposed to from a very early age. And people usually have to go through some health crisis before they realize that there is more to health than taking a pill.
It seems easier to take the pill until your symptoms get so much worse. There aren't enough pills to fix all your problems.
Right. Pill one deals with symptom A, and then you need pill two to deal with the side effect of symptom A, et cetera, et cetera. And that's like, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a very
Totally.
serious problem, especially with hormonal difficulties. So often women come in, oh yeah, I had bad problems and I was put on the birth control pill. And here they are many years later. They have infertility, they've had a blood clot, they have depression, they've had weight gain, their problem is still there. And now they're thinking, well, what else can I do?
And the root cause of the problem was never discovered. The birth control was a band-aid. It never got to the root cause of the problem, which is what you and I help patients discover.
Right.
So through working in that clinic, I think what inspired you to become a naturopath at some point was the change that patients were making, right? This transformation that happened. And part of that involves diet. And I understand you are actually a chef. So you're going to be able to speak to diet changes better than a lot of my other guests. So how does someone go from eating that standard American diet, which they think is acceptable and normal and fine, right, to a more vegetable centric organic diet without just feeling like overwhelmed and how am I going to do this and how am I going to get rid of the Doritos and Pop
Right,
Tarts and whatnot?
Doritos. Yeah, Pop Tarts. Oh my goodness. Um, well, I saw people working in this office make radical changes immediately and in a month, and they were very motivated because they were being really sick. So I think if you're very sick, that's a very strong motivation. But
Mhm.
I think yes, it is absolutely overwhelming because to go from your standard kitchen to a kitchen that is ecologically minded with no plastic, and maybe you're no longer using your microwave, or you no longer, this is a pet peeve of mine where people put these plastic spatulas into the heat and the toxins from the plastic are getting into the food. So there's just a lot to learn, and
Yes.
there it is definitely overwhelming. So my message is you don't have to do it in a day. You don't have to do it in a week. You can take like a section of your kitchen, like I'm going to get rid of all the plastic, and
Yep.
you spend a week doing that. And I love getting jars and putting things that are in plastic in the jars, and it looks really pretty in your food cabinet, and it's also very healthy. And then you could take a day and go through your cabinet and throw out anything that has gluten in it or it's in a box. And you have to realize when you're throwing this stuff out, you can give it, of course, to a food pantry.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you buy stuff in a box, first of all, it's lost most of its nutritional value. You're paying for the advertising and the box, the
Mm,
cardboard and the printing and the chemicals that went into preserving the food. So by the time you get that food, there's very little live substance
food.
in
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
food product in a box. So, yes, there are certain things we buy in a box, like organic brown rice or gluten-free crackers, but we're gluten-free pasta, but we're very conscious of what that is, and it doesn't make up a huge percent of what you're eating. Most of what you're eating, you purchase from the farmer's market or local health food store or CSA food delivery place boxes, which is so convenient right now.
Yep. Totally. So we've mentioned how overwhelming it can be for one individual to change what they're eating and to change what's happening in their kitchen. And you have to bring your family along with you. So what are
Yeah.
tips for that, for enticing the spouse or convincing the kids or
Right.
whatnot?
I think that this is, first of all, the food that you cook, whether it's you as a woman or you as your partner, we can't always assume that the woman is the cook. Sometimes the male or female partner is a cook, needs to be delicious. And the wonderful thing about eating this way, and I recommend in general a modified Mediterranean diet, and I can talk about that in a
Yeah,
minute,
yeah, please do.
is that it's delicious and it's very easily translatable from the standard American diet into a healthier version of what that can be with more farm to table food.
Mhm.
And the reason I recommend a modified Mediterranean diet, and I'm sure you've all heard of the keto and the this protein and the no protein and the vegan. I mean, it's totally overwhelming, and there is really no one diet for
Mhm.
everyone. But the modified Mediterranean diet has the most research of the largest population over extended periods like 22, 25 years. So of thousands and
Yeah.
thousands, like 50,000, 100,000 people. And most of the research, or a lot of it, was done in Greece.
Yeah.
And so that bears a lot of weight because what I recommend in my practice is evidence based. It's not like I'm making this up from the air. I mean, I do
Yeah.
spend a lot of time in PubMed researching, so I feel really confident in recommending the modified Mediterranean. And I modify it because I take away gluten. I think in America, gluten is not so healthy for us the majority of times. It contributes to inflammation. There's GMOs,
Yep.
and most gluten has a lot of carbs, and carbs promote sugar, and that creates inflammatory process. And there we are, we've gained weight. So for me, it's less carbs, because in Greece, they are eating that delicious bread and some of the orzo and all of that. And I focus more on vegetables and some feta cheese and organic chicken and fish. And you can have meat every now and then if you choose, you don't have to. And
Sure.
then a little bit of carbs, which are gluten-free every now and then. And the nice thing about it is you can have wine if you choose. Red wine every now and then. Not a lot, but every now and then a glass.
Sure. I would agree if there was one diet that I could recommend across the board. I mean, there's no perfect diet. There's no one diet for everyone, other than I think we should be eating organic. But the
Yes.
Mediterranean diet is close enough to that. I totally agree. So we make this enticable to our family because we're going to cook. Um, Deliciously is not a word, but we're going to make the food delicious. And my husband does most of the cooking in our household.
That's
So
great.
I know he adds a lot of spices and when he's cooking to flavor up the food. And it's notable in our now 20-month-old, he doesn't want to just eat the plain hamburger. He want to eat, he wants to eat the protein that has been, that's more savory, has spices in it that Eric
Great.
makes. So it's interesting to see how his palate is developing.
Well, you're grooming him. That's how you eat as a
Yeah,
family. I mean, you sit
yeah,
at the table and he looks at what you're eating and he tastes it and it tastes good. And so he's developing his taste buds according to what he's being fed. And every
yeah,
culture has their own seasoning base that they use, which is, I think, a beautiful part of epigenetics, which is,
yeah.
we have genes, but whether they're turned on or turned off has a lot to do with our environmental, lifestyle, and nutritional factors.
Absolutely. I want to go back to the kitchen again because you bring up a good point that is often not discussed. So we talk about many times with at least I do with my patients. I'm sure you do too about changing the diet, but we have to change the kitchen. So can we talk about how to make the kitchen less toxic? So you talked about
Mhm.
removing plastic, and I think that's very important. Please do not microwave plastic. Please do not microwave food sitting in plastic. Yeah.
Oh my
um,
goodness, so
I
dangerous.
I swap out. So I used to have a lot of nasty Tupperware, and I've swapped out most of that for glass containers that do look
Mhm.
prettier and nicer, more likely to break when my son, goes through
Oh yeah,
the
absolutely. You
cabinet.
have to be ready for that.
But but I've swapped out that for glass, and so that's one swap, and it sounds like that's something you're recommending to your patients. What else do you recommend we be aware of in the kitchen? So what other swaps can we make?
Pots and pans. So the non-stick stuff has chemicals that leach through. Even if they say they don't, a tiny little scratch happens, it's inevitable. And then you're using those plastic based spatulas or spoons. And so that heat hits that plastic and then it gets into your food. So actually, there's been a lot of research that one of the number one ways you can prevent iron deficiency anemia is by using those old fashioned black cast iron skillets. So I love those. I also love the silver stainless steel that
Yep.
you can get from, Sur La Table. They have, or Macy's, they have these sales where you can get a whole set of
Set. Yep.
that.
Yep. That's what
Yeah,
we cook
and
with.
which is, yeah, and you only need to buy it once.
Yep.
And the holidays are coming up. They'll be having sales. You can ask a couple people to get together. And this is a present that you will use every day and you'll have for many, many years. So I like that. I mean, nobody needs another shirt or a pair of pajamas,
Get him
really.
something useful. Yes. My parents gifted me with a Salad Master set. I mean,
Oh,
years ago. And when I'm in college, I'm thinking, why do I need this? This is really expensive. I can't believe they bought this, 'cause it was one of my gifts, And at the time I was thinking I wanted something else, but now I'm really thankful that because I understand why and feel blessed that they were thinking of that with,
mhm.
my health and cooking moving forward. So that I 100% am on board with that. So for the utensils though, do you then recommend like wooden spoons
Yes.
or okay.
Yeah. Old fashioned wooden spoons are your best bet. Now, I'm a pastry chef, or I used to be. So I do have my baking spatulas, which I use when I'm folding egg whites or putting something in a cake in a pan, but they never go near heat. So if something is near heat, it's either my wooden spoons or my metal spoons. And you get used to it. Like those plastic things are very toxic for you. And what I should explain is that they have a chemical in them that's released into the food that mimics estrogen. So when estrogen is processed by your body, it needs to bind and it needs to park, like in a parking lot, let's say, as an example. It binds with a receptor and then it's eliminated through your urine or feces. But these estrogen receptors get blocked up with these chemicals that are called estrogen disruptors because they look very much like estrogen. So when the real estrogen comes in to park and then be eliminated, there's all those parking spots are taken up. And that can create estrogen dominance. You can have lots of hormonal problems, PCOS, infertility, breast cancer. Dr. Gray knows a lot about this. So we don't want to use plastic.
No, that's a great analogy. I really like that. So many women are now realizing, okay, I need to get fragrances out of my life, or I need to switch up my personal care products. But the same is true not only in the bathroom, it's true in the kitchen. So I really like what you're saying about those utensils. So definitely don't park your plastic next to heat. Like just don't let those touch. You can use the or even silicone. Like I don't know if
Yes.
silicone bleeds or what are your thoughts on silicone?
I don't like silicone. I was just talking to hanging out on Zoom with a colleague, and she is a naturopathic oncologist, and she was using plastic to heat up her food. And I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Well, it's silicone." And I said, "I don't care. It's like, don't take a chance. It's just not worth it." They go, "It doesn't," but I don't believe it. I'm sorry. It's like plastic is plastic. So I mean, I would need to see real research that silicone absolutely does not leach, but it's not, use a wooden spoon. It's like,
sure, makes sense. So what else can we do in the kitchen? Are those kind of the main tips, exchanges we should make?
There's the plastic, there's the pots and the pans, there's the dishwashing detergent, because your hands are exposed to this liquid that you're using to wash your dishes, as well as what's in the dishwasher. And luckily, there's the eco products up the kazoos for dishwashing material, and it doesn't have, the fragrance is natural because, as you said, the fragrance gets into our systems through our nose, which goes right into our brain. And then there we have estrogen disruption. So, and the sponges that you use, and the cleaning products that you use on the floor or the sink, all of that gets your body is exposed to that. Aluminum foil is a very big one. That is a no-no, in my opinion. It's like plastic wrap. Plastic wrap is another no-no.
What if the food doesn't touch it? So what if you have aluminum foil? I'm just thinking of the only time I use aluminum foil is on the bottom of a baking sheet, and then I'll have like I'll put wings, like if I bake chicken wings on, I don't know the kitchen terminology, like a rack. I almost put like a rack.
Yeah. Oh, that's fine.
So if it's not touching the aluminum foil, it's just catching the drippings, it's okay. But don't cook on the aluminum foil, or that could leach. Like don't put the chicken wing directly on the aluminum foil, or that could leach.
Right. But you could also put just paper.
Parchment paper or something.
Yeah, parchment paper instead of aluminum.
Makes sense. I wonder about that parchment paper. I wonder if it's, coated with, what is it coated with? Is there plastic or what's on there?
I don't know. That's a good point. I mean, I think as you get more into it, we have to do some research. As a baker, I use that parchment paper all the time. Yeah. I think there are different types of parchment paper, and
I think you can even get organic or like.
Yeah, well, you can get organic plastic wrap.
But it's still plastic.
Right. And you can get organic aluminum foil, and you can get organic wax paper, which is,
I think that's what I buy. Yeah.
Me too. So, I mean, we do the best we can.
Right.
And it's, you don't want to become orthorexic in your kitchen, which means and I had a patient like that, obsessed about every little detail that, that's not healthy. Food is
that stresses you out. Exactly.
Yeah. Love and abundance and sharing and having fun. So we want to keep that as the foundation and remember that.
Yes. So we just slowly start making out swaps, right? Knowledge is power. We don't let it overpower us, but we just slowly make out swaps. So let's talk about gluten and sugar specifically, which are heavily used in the kitchen and in pastries.
Yes, they are. I've had my full of that.
And did that impact your health, I should ask?
Well, when I was a pastry chef, I got so immune to it that like making mousse for like 500 people with all that chocolate and huge vats of heavy cream, huge
I
vats of
bet.
chocolate, and literally for 500 people, because I was working in a hotel kitchen. Uh, it was like, I don't ever want to see a chocolate mousse again. And I still don't eat it very often. But when I worked as a chef in a restaurant, when I was in naturopathic school, the husband of one of my friends owned this phenomenal restaurant, and I worked there. And I was Ms. Pudgy because the food was so good, and we made everything from scratch. This was before the concept of farm to table. I was very overweight, and I ate everything, and I loved it. And I wasn't healthy, and that is not healthy. I mean,
Sure.
I realized when I left there that I couldn't eat like that. And so
Yeah.
I don't. But
So
it's
let's
very
talk about how sugar makes us pudgy, though. I mean, let's talk about that. So why is sugar bad? Why is gluten bad for our health? And then we'll take it a step further and our hormones.
okay. Well, I think that gluten, first of all, it's the type of food that it's in. It's in pastries, it's in pasta, and it's in cookies, and it's in crackers. So it's in this fast food that we as Americans, how many people have start their day on their way into the office, and they stop at the local coffee shop and get a frappy coffee with sugar, creamy stuff in it, and a pastry. And that's how they start their morning. So that is like,
The
that's not
worst possible breakfast. Yeah.
right.
Tastes
Right.
good, but it's not good for your health.
And it doesn't even taste
Tastes good.
that good. Not that, I mean,
But
if
you get
when
that dopamine hit, I guess, right? So that's why they're addicted to it many times.
well, also the sugar creates, when you eat pastries, it creates a lot of sugar in your bloodstream, and then the insulin is released to eat that sugar up. And then so you have a lot of sugar for a while, but then you have that 10:30 crash, and that's when you go for another cup of coffee. So you're not sustaining your energy in a positive way. It's very draining. And I mean, healthy flour, when it's grown healthy, is and it's milled freshly, I don't have any problem with that. But it's what, a lot of people buy flour in bags that they process
Then
every
bleached and yeah,
bleach,
yeah.
and it's bleached, it has to be super white. I mean, that's not natural food. That's
Mhm.
just a bleached thing that has lots of GMOs in it, that has no nutrition. It's sort of like eating broken down cardboard. And then you add, margarine, and to bake with, instead of real butter or some kind of saturated fat, and white sugar. By It's so sweet nobody can eat it, but people are used to that. And you have this scone or something that's been mass produced, that's being sold in Safeway, and that's how people start their day. It's very unfortunate. I mean, that, and then people wonder why they have obesity, blood sugar, and hypertension, cardiovascular disease. I mean, change that, just that one thing. If you change only that one thing, make a commitment, I'm going to change what I eat for breakfast in the morning.
Yep.
That will make a huge difference in your health.
Totally agreed. I many times my patients are trialing, I should say, intermittent fasting. So sometimes they will
Yes.
change them to not have breakfast, but some people, especially like, when I was pregnant, I can't skip
No,
breakfast. Like
no,
some
of
of us
course
do
not.
need to eat eat
No,
breakfast.
of
So
course not.
healthy fats, healthy protein first thing in the morning. I'm okay with some fruit. You don't want to just have a banana that's going to spike your blood sugar, but I'm okay with
Hmm.
some fruit in the morning. But choosing a better breakfast is a great way to nourish your body, prevent chronic disease, and even help with mental health, as well as reducing autoimmune disease. And that's something that I greatly think gluten contributes to. And maybe you
Yes.
can speak to this a little bit, since I'm not a chef, but the way that gluten has been explained to me is that it helps um, hold food together. It kind of helps it stay like gunky, or how would you, I don't know what the correct term is. Why do they
Well,
use gluten? And how even some, I've heard that even some chefs will use a high gluten dough. Like what's the purpose
it,
of that?
right, depends what kind of bread texture you want. If you want a sourdough, it depends on if you want a condensed bread, or if you want a puffy light bread, Or if you're making pastry, you definitely don't want a high gluten because then the pastry dough or the cookie
That
will
makes
come out
sense.
like lead. But if
Yeah.
you're making a dense bread, you are going to want to use a high gluten flour. And if you're making a more lighter bread or you have a sourdough starter, you don't need to use that. So when you're baking, and bread baking is very separate from making a crust or making a croissant or making a cookie or making a cake. It's a very different department, so to speak. And there are people who specialize in only baking bread. And it takes a long time because you have to like proof it. You have to know how much water, you have to decide how much flour you're going to add. And there are recipes. And sometimes if it's too humid out, the bread doesn't turn out, or if the temperature isn't right.
Sure.
I mean, it's not that easy. And baking gluten-free is a challenge. I've developed gluten-free flour recipes, and I've gone through a lot of bags of flour and a lot of pastries to come up with the right combination. And that's just part of what happens. I mean, if you're dedicated to being a gluten-free chef, you have to be willing to, give away a lot of cookies that didn't come out, or cakes or whatever. Because I'm not keeping it in the house, that's for sure.
I usually just buy a pre-mixed, gluten-free flour combo.
Yes.
Or can you, to our listeners, can you mention some of your, I mean, I know you can't give us your exact recipe, but what top
No,
um
of course.
kind of wheat alternative flours do you recommend?
I think what's on the store now, in the shelves, some gluten-free prepared flour mixtures is great. It's nice if it doesn't have only white flour in it. That's part of the problem with the gluten-free flours. They're all white. So, like, cornstarch and tapioca and brown rice flour, even if it's brown rice, is going to be white. So it is a very high glycemic index.
Good
Mochi
point.
flour has a
Yeah.
very high glycemic index.
Yep.
So I like to find a brand that has some teff in it because that's a more natural grain. And
Okay.
then what I often do in my baking is, let's say it calls for 2 cups of flour, is I'll do 1 1/4 cup of the gluten-free flour substitute, and then I'll do 3/4 of almond flour, or even a whole cup. So it's half and half.
Sure,
And the
sure.
almond flour, there's 2 different types of almond flour. One is finely ground without the skins, and one is brownish and has the skin. And I use the finely ground one
Okay.
because it gives you a less dense product. And I'm talking about making cookies or cakes or a crust.
Sure.
Um, Crust is difficult. Crust, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So it's very hard to get that crispy, flaky thing that you get with gluten regular when you make with butter. When you make gluten free, it doesn't quite translate.
What do you have any other tips for gluten-free baking that you want to uh,
Yeah, in
share?
general, just general baking tips. The eggs need to be at room temperature. Take them out the night before or a couple days before. When you leave eggs out, the protein in the egg whites solidifies, and especially if you have a recipe that calls for beating egg whites, they'll beat more. And when you beat egg whites, you want to make sure that the bowl and the whisks are very dry, or else they won't, and there's no egg yolk in the egg white, or else it won't whip up. And you want to start by putting a pinch of salt in it because that helps bind the protein, which is going to get the egg
Hmm.
whites fluffy. You start out at a low speed and then you increase it after you see a few bubbles. And then so we have eggs at room temperature. Butter must be also kept out overnight, room temperature. If you're making cookies or cake, if you're making crust, it's a different story. But those are just standard baking recipes. And sometimes the baking time with gluten free is going to be less than with regular. So you have to like check it a little bit more. And sometimes the liquid component might need to be either increased or decreased. You'll have to use if you've made the recipe before as a regular recipe and you're switching to gluten free, you'll have to try to remember what it looked like the first couple times. And don't, if it doesn't turn out perfect, it's not going to be like a horrible disaster. So you just have to lower your perfectionist expectations when you're baking gluten-free and realize that it's a process to learn how to do it.
Yep, have patience. Yeah. So I've noticed a lot of the pre-packaged like mixes have something like xanthan gum or
Xanthan
guar
gum.
gum or something in there.
Yeah.
So can you explain why that's in there? Is that just a
It's just,
substitute for the gluten
it's,
bind?
yeah, it's a stabilizer and it helps bind. Yes, absolutely. And they do have it like those Bob's Red Mill
Yeah.
brownie recipes or chocolate cake recipes.
I
Yeah.
love their cornbread. They have, yeah, some good recipes. Yeah, or good mixes, I should say. Yeah.
Right. But it's so easy to make your own cornbread with, half cornmeal. And then I use cassava flour
Okay.
because it has a lot of protein in it and a
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
low glycemic index. So it's so easy to make a cornbread. You just take any recipe and you use half of the gluten-free flour mixture and then half of the cassava flour, or you mix that up with the cassava flour instead of the white flour, and then the other half is the cornmeal. And then you just follow the regular recipe. And it's a one bowl thing. It doesn't need to be complicated. So there are times when those prepackaged things are really a lifesaver, but in general, I try to start from scratch with that stuff. It
I
takes
need
maybe
more
5 or 10
practice
minutes.
to build my confidence.
Okay, yeah. Well, we could have some Zoom appointments where
There
we're
you go.
baking together.
There you go. I want to talk about baking low sugar also, but before we do that, I want to go back because we not that we skipped over, but I was just kept drilling you in questions with baking gluten free. So I want to go back to why sugar is bad for our health and our hormones. So what's the impact? How does it impact our hormones?
Well, sugar, when you eat it, causes your glucose in your blood to become elevated. And then that causes insulin to be released from the pancreas because your body is getting a message there's too much sugar. So you have the ups of the initial spike of the glucose and then the down when that glucose is removed. And that is a lot of pressure on your adrenal glands to keep your energy stable, despite you're having this up and this down of sugar, like the gas in your gas tank. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it isn't. And then your adrenal glands have to come in and try to save the day and keep your energy stable. So all of this really impacts your pituitary gland and your inflammatory process. And your pituitary is where the or mistress, I should say, messages are coming from to get the hormones to be released from the different organs. So this whole stress system, your body has to work harder to function healthily. And sooner or later, all of this working harder, one of these systems of compensation is going to say, I'm too tired, I can't keep up. And that's when you begin to have symptoms. But the process leading up to those symptoms has been going on for many years before they actually showed up.
That's good. So essentially, I would argue that then your thyroid can tank, right? So it can impact your thyroid. And also, this can impact sex hormones also. So the more overweight you are, like a good analogy is I'll kind of tell my male patients, even, have you seen, friends with big beer belly? Many times those guys have higher levels of estrogen because
Mhm.
that fat there that you packed on from eating sugar, right, secretes the aromatase enzyme, which converts their testosterone over to estrogen. So having that
Mhm.
sugar, developing that beer belly, or in women, they can have, larger, you can be larger on any area. We all put it on differently. That can actually indirectly lead to more of an estrogen dominant situation, dragging down progesterone, and that can lead to a whole slew of symptoms, which we won't get into today, but we've discussed on some other podcasts. So sugar is not good for your hormones. It can impact all of them. So go ahead if you want to expand.
I was just going to say, and sugar drives breast cancer.
Ding, ding, ding.
So in 1931, Otto Warburg, who is a German scientist, won the Nobel Medicine Prize for discovering something that was called the Warburg effect. And given a choice of like gas or energy, cancer will choose sugar over oxygen, even though when it makes that decision, it has to work harder and get less energy from the sugar department than it would if it just went over to the oxygen side. and that's called aerobic glycolysis. And so sugar, if you have any type of inflammatory, autoimmune, infertility, PCOS, a thyroid problem, sugar it's not just driving cancer. It's not feeding cancer cells only. It's just creating so much more inflammation. And
Mm-hmm.
inflammation is the root cause of disease for all of these illnesses, no matter
Mm-hmm.
what they are.
Totally agreed. So the holidays are coming up. So this is the time of year
Yes.
I think many of my patients, not all of them, but some veer off the bandwagon
Slip
and eat a
off the
little.
bandwagon.
Yes.
Yes, we're all slipping off. We're just
Yeah.
teetering on the bandwagon to eat or not to eat.
Especially with COVID this year, many of them have already said, I've gained 10 pounds already
Yeah,
this year, right?
very.
And I said, okay, I say back, the holidays are coming. What are we going to do here? How are we going to not pack on another 5-10 pounds? So
That's too much.
Dr.
Yeah.
Lourie, tell us,
Yes.
how can we cook sugar-free? How can we still, have enjoy the holidays, have delicious, I'll say still treats, right? How can we
Yeah.
still not overindulge, but still indulge, have fun with our family, have some treats that are more low sugar? What are your sugar substitutes? What do you recommend there?
Well, I should just start out by saying that my free gift to everyone here is every year I put out my pastry baking ebook that I have spent many months and trying not to gain the weight from trying the pastries myself, of taking recipes where I make gluten-free and maybe you have either no sugar or extremely low sugar. So I've really changed my palate, and it takes a while. But now when I try a regular pastry with all that sugar, it's just very unattractive. It's too sweet. So there are ways, like if you're making a date nut bread, you do not need sugar because dates are naturally sugar.
Yep.
If you're making banana bread, you don't need. It's very easy. You do not need sugar. If you're making a chocolate cake, you need very, very little sugar. So it is a bit about adjusting your palate. And if you are going to put sugar, what the options that I use are either monk fruit sugar, which you can easily find at the health food store,
Yep.
or date nut sugar, date sugar, or maple syrup sugar, or honey. Or, I mean, that's just those four things are enough. Now, brown sugar is white sugar that has molasses in it. No, we don't want to do that. But sometimes a couple tablespoons of molasses, especially if you're baking a spice cake or something, are just fine.
Sure.
But I think we have to realize that the old way of looking at things as far as being super sweet, it's not happening anymore.
Yep.
Now, if you're making a delicious butter cookie recipe to decorate your cookies, yeah, it's, if you can easily use maple syrup instead of the white sugar for that. And I would start out by doing a quarter or a third of the amount. So if it called for 2 cups of flour, you can use the gluten-free. And then if it called for like a cup of sugar, which is just so much, I would do a quarter cup of maple syrup sugar and I would be fine with that.
So go down, you're saying, so literally, just want to make sure I heard you right. Instead of a cup of processed white sugar, you could use a 4th cup of maple syrup.
Yeah.
Okay. What about coconut sugar or even stevia? What are your thoughts on those?
I think coconut sugar is great.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I forgot. Thank you for mentioning
Oh, that's okay.
that.
I use that and I just wanted to know what
I
you.
think coconut sugar is great, but you have to realize that some of the food that you're making is going to taste like coconut. So you have to
Sure.
be, as is coconut flour. So you have to be, you have to experiment, and you have to really just be okay. If it's like, oh, it has a little too much coconut, it's like, fine. It's still delicious. People love it. And I'm not a big stevia fan, especially for baking. I know it's a natural leaf, but it's just so processed. I think that, go to nature. What's in nature? Honey, maple syrup, maple sugar, monk fruit,
Yep.
coconut sugar. It's all from nature. You can't go wrong with that. I mean, that
Makes
it's
sense.
not like we have options.
So how does changing our diet and living this way impact our health and longevity? So what are we going for here? We've already mentioned reducing glucose and insulin. How else is that going to impact our longevity?
Where as we get older, it gets more difficult to hold on to what we had. And I know this sounds strange, but I'm like past my 50s already. And
Well, you look great.
well, thank you. Thanks for the beauty parlor. And I also take a ton of supplements and I watch what I eat. So I
Yeah, yeah,
practice what I preach.
yeah.
Um, I think, and I exercise. So I think, I know this sounds strange and you don't think about it when you're in your 40s, but you want to begin to think about how you're going to hold on and maintain what you have as you get older. And nobody is talking about this. So in your 40s, you really want to, if you're out of shape and if you don't, the word exercise has such negative connotations to people. So I'm going to reframe it: positive, fun movement for
There you
you,
go.
whatever that is. Walking, Pilates, swimming, doing dancing at home in front of the television. There's now this thing I've seen on Facebook. It's like a mirror that you put up on the
Oh,
wall
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's connected to some, I don't know what, and there's exercise stuff going on there. There's the Peloton bike, I mean, which is a lot of my friends are getting. So whatever you need to do, which is going to be fun, positive movement. Let's delete the word exercise because we all had traumatic gym experiences, and start having fun with movement. And we want to build muscle mass, and we want to build bone and tendon strength in your 40s, because you don't want to end up in your 90s or in your 80s with a walker or in a wheelchair. And the way to keep that from happening is 40 years in advance. I know you can't relate to this conversation, but it happens before you know it.
That's good.
And
Yeah.
so what we want is, as we get older, first of all, I think how we feel about ourselves, we all have this little negative voice in our head where, we're not good enough, we're not pretty enough, we're not tall enough, we didn't do this right, we only did that, we should have done A and we did B. I mean, we need to begin to become aware of that negative voice, and just, you can't tell it to shut up, but you can say, okay, I'm going to take a break. Let's turn the volume down and just
Turn that
realize,
mean girl off. Yeah.
yeah,
Don't listen to
that
her. Yeah.
mean inner voice of, you're not enough, you didn't, or you did something wrong or whatever. It's like we need to begin to really embrace how much we do in a day. And you, as a mom of your beautiful boy, and this work that you do, I mean, if you made a list of every single thing you did in a day, there'd probably be 1,000 things in it. I mean, and who acknowledges that? Most of us don't get that acknowledgement, so it needs to come from ourselves. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that
So true.
is really important for our longevity with our attitude, and then maintaining and understanding that we're building our health in our 40s for as we get older. That will help maintain your longevity.
I love that word build. That's the whole preface of my book. I mean, it's about building, your longevity blueprint back there.
I see it. It's beautiful.
all,
Just
ab-
beautiful.
all about building longevity. And so you've given us many tips today to help, especially since the holidays are coming up. Hopefully we'll have more fun in the kitchen
I
and
hope
not feel
so.
deprived, but have some
No, I'm
options.
not
So
into
yeah.
deprivation.
Yeah.
No, I don't, we don't want to do that. We want to have the holidays, especially with the difficulties we've all had this last year, be times of joy. And baking and shipping things to friends who you can't get together with in person is a really nice thing to do.
So how can our listeners get a copy of this free pastry guide that you're preparing for the year?
Well, it will be on my website under the download sections. So
Okay.
my website is my name, Carol Lourie, LOURIE.com. And under the download section, you just go there and you'll have to put in your email, but we don't spam or nothing.
Sure.
And your this and anything else that you want that's on my website will be sent to you immediately.
Awesome. So we'll have this posted in December, so you can get a copy of that pastry guide. I know I'm looking
Just in
forward to.
time.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly, exactly. I'm looking forward to using that. So I want to conclude with your top longevity tip. This could be something that you utilize daily. I mean, it's part of your daily routine. What's your top longevity tip?
I do something every day that has nothing to do with anything other than nurturing my inner being.
Like, so give me an example of what that is for you.
And for me, that is often gardening.
Okay.
I can go out and I have all my pots and my plants and pots. I'll water them, I'll talk to them, and I will deadhead them. And that can take 5 or 10 minutes. And I'm outside in the sun,
Yes.
and I'm moving
Exposed to the
things around.
microbes, you're
Mhm.
grounding, you have the
Yeah.
light. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I do. But if you can't go out, especially as it's going to be colder and snowing where a lot of people live, or raining, hopefully, where I live, I think just sitting and looking out the window and meditating and just clearing your mind. I mean, those 5 or 10 minutes where you just bring energy into yourself make a really big difference in how much you love yourself and how much you can give to others and your family and friends and the world in a positive way. And that needs to happen more for all of us. It starts with our inner connection.
That's so good. We should start the day that way and end the day that way.
Yeah, totally.
A wonderful point. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm glad that I had a chef on. I think our listeners will find this very valuable come the holidays and year round. So thank you for all your expertise. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been great to be here.